So, good morning, good afternoon to everybody in the world. And I want to welcome you to this IFLA section Public Library webinar. My name is Sander van Kempen. I work at the National Library in the Netherlands, and I'm also a member of the IFLA section Public Libraries. And on behalf of that section, we're organizing this webinar called Public Libraries Responding in Times of Crisis. A little bit about the Public Library section. Our goal is to continue to develop professional development within public libraries. And we do that via webinars like this, blog posts, etc. And of course, hopefully we can get back in doing that via an in-person conference like the WIC. I'll get back to some major projects we're working on at the end. For now, I just wanted to remark that this webinar is being recorded and a blog will be shared with the recording at a later date. So for now, I want to introduce my colleague, Erik Boekesteijn, my esteemed colleague, who will be the moderator for this event.
Well, thank you so much, Sander. And it's always so amazing to realize. You said good morning, good afternoon, but we have people I saw from Brazil, people from Germany already in the chat. I saw it flash by, and there's people from everywhere. So we should be saying good evening and good night as well. And it's always amazing to reach out to so many passionate librarians. And like Sander said, my name is Erik Boekesteijn, also working at the National Library of the Netherlands. You see the building you see here behind me, an amazing place. It holds the headquarters of IFLA, of course, but also Europeana, and it's involved in a lot of library work in the Netherlands, both academic, public libraries, interesting place, never a dull moment. Today, I'm very honored to talk about, well, troubled times. That's not a very nice subject, but the way we respond can be uplifting, as we will notice. We have climate change, we have the pandemic, we have energy crisis. There's a lot of negativity around it, but there's also, you will notice, as I said, a lot of positive feelings around this. I'm going to ask my guest, Vickery, Dr. Sadie-Jane, and Professor David Lankes. I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself, and if you forget something, I will add. And Vickery, you're on left on my screen. Please, to the audience, introduce yourself.
Sure. Well, thank you, Erik. I'm Vickery Bowles. I'm the city librarian at Toronto Public Library. TPL is the largest public library system in Canada, and we have 100 branches serving a population of 2.9 million people. And you know, it's like everyone else. We've gone through lots of changes through the pandemic, and so this is a great opportunity to talk about that.
Thank you so much. I have to say that I remember I was in your library. Is that the Sherlock Holmes room? Is that still in the library?
Yes, it's still there. Yes.
That's quite, for the people who haven't been to Toronto, there must be many out there. It's an extraordinary place. You really sort of step into the world of Sherlock, and you feel that you're an investigator. Amazing library, amazing city, and
thank you.
Love to hear more. Sadie-Jane, I haven't been to I've been to Singapore, but I haven't been to a specific library. The plan was last time we were in Malaysia at IFLA conference, but I fell ill and I ended up in a hospital. Oh. Long story, I don't want to go into that.
Well, you can always come back soon once everything clears. Now you know me, so you're going to get private tours.
I have to come back soon. I'm quite a few friends there as well. But please tell us a little about yourself and your work over there.
Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Sadie-Jane. Yes, it comes together like ice cream. And I am the current head of learning and knowledge curation, as well as editor at the Singapore Institute of Management. Now, that's the job that pays the bills. Those that do not, there are many, as I hold various governing council roles with both local as well as global associations within and outside the library world. As of end March 2021, I had the privilege of becoming the Library Association of Singapore president, a post that I will be holding from 2021 until 2023. And the Library Association consists of public libraries, academic libraries, as well as special libraries in Singapore.
Very, very good. Like I said, Singapore is an example to quite a few of us when it comes to library work. David, last but definitely not least, I can already say you are, because you're not going to say it yourself, you're an award-winning professor with amazing books, and recently you had the what is it, the Gilbert Much Award. I have to look at my notes, which is quite something to receive. But please, I'm taking away your words. Say something about yourself for the people who don't know it.
That's all right. So my name is David Lankes. I'm the Virginia and Charles Bowden Professor of Librarianship, it's a mouthful, at the University of Texas at Austin in their School of Information. It's probably relevant that because we're going to be talking about the pandemic, that for most of it, I was actually the professor and director of the University of South Carolina School of Information Science and their library science program. So that's me.
It is neat. Well, let's waste no time, because like I said, these are strange and dynamic times. A lot is happening, and I want to leave some time as well for the interaction and have some people answer questions who are watching this, who are participants. So if you have questions to these people out there, or in general, put your questions in the chat, and Sander, who opened up, we'll have a look at them, follow them, and then put them in the end so we can talk about it. So questions in the chat, don't forget. I have some questions myself, of course, and we had a pre-talk, and I want to start with you, Sadie-Jane. I will adjust it a little bit for David because he's coming not from the library, within the library itself. But what has your library done differently when it comes to serving residents as a response to the pandemic? Can you just say what happened in Toronto, Vickery, shortly? We don't have much time, so I have to prepare you. I have to be a strict moderator.
Okay. Well, we did develop some new services that we hadn't offered before, but even services that we hadn't even contemplated. So when we closed in March of 2020, we developed some of these services in response to community need. One of them was the seniors wellness call. So staff were calling our seniors just to check in on them, to see how they're doing, have a conversation. And that kind of developed once a vaccine was available into vaccination calls. Toronto Public Health asked us to start calling our seniors to see if they needed information about vaccination and help in getting vaccinated. We had vaccine clinics in branches and support for mobile vaccination clinics with our staff driving trucks and that kind of thing. One of the issues that emerged early on was the fact that once the libraries were closed, we always knew that people needed libraries for access to Wi-Fi. They'd sit outside of the branches when we were closed. And we saw that, of course, during the pandemic too, tremendously. But we also found, and through our community partners and city partners, there are people in the community who not only didn't have Wi-Fi or internet access at home, they didn't have devices. And these, of course, were our most vulnerable people in the community. And so we developed with a partnership, a nonprofit group in Toronto, and with the support of our foundation, internet connectivity kits. And these are where we gave away a free laptop, 2 years of unlimited data, and then the training and support of our staff in using that and accessing services through a laptop at home. So this, is a Band-Aid solution, of course. It's not the answer to people, but it was a Band-Aid solution in response to the pandemic and trying to help our most vulnerable, who are often seniors and newcomers, as well, and people living in racialized and low-income communities. And then the other thing that we did, which is probably the most uncontemplated initiative, was we transformed 12 of our branches into food banks. When we closed our branches in March of 2020, at the same time, food banks in Toronto, over a third of them closed because many of their volunteers were seniors, and the spaces that they were operating their food banks had closed. So in response to that, we worked with our food bank partners here in Toronto, and we opened up 12 of our branches. We asked for volunteers from our staff, and our staff immediately volunteered to work in these food banks. We converted our book and sorting distribution hub into a food sorting and distribution hub. And in the end, we served 42,000 people through the food banks in our branches. And one of our staff came up with the idea that, you know, if we could get our foundation to donate children's books, we could put children's books into those food hampers as well. And so we distributed over 4,200 children's books in food banks as well.
Amazing.
And this has been, we're still operating 2 of our food banks. In two of our branches in parking lots. Shipping containers have been converted and insulated for winter use and food bank distribution. And so those, because there's such a high need for food banks in those communities, and food banks don't exist there. So it's been really a great initiative for us. It's developed into a wonderful partnership, and it really has actually highlighted with some really great media attention the important role of public libraries in the communities and how they can serve those communities in a time of crisis.
Vickery, I'm sure there will be questions. I will have questions on this as well, like the logistics and the way a librarian think, how this helps to distribute food is a very interesting one. We're going to get back to that because I want to go to Sadie-Jane. Sadie-Jane, same question to you. How in Singapore, what happened when the pandemic hit you, and how did the response go?
Well, it's pretty much similar for here, right? Public libraries all know that the seniors favor their daily routines, like going to the library first thing in the morning and read their newspapers. But the minute the libraries, you know, had to kind of like shut their doors, well, there have been a couple of stories of seniors who started online learning communities to help seniors pick digital skills up so that they could still read their newspapers and stuff like that. Public libraries also engage seniors through various stay-home activities and programs. There was this thing called Read, Play, Learn programs where they could learn, you know, how to read the books online, how to better use technology, health and wellness things, entertainment. You know, K-pop is hot, right? Korean pop.
Yeah.
So no surprises there. K-pop, K-drama. How do you get more into it and find out more about your favorite Korean stars, and even mastering things like sketching and Japanese language. Now, as we dealt with the seniors, we also had to manage, you know, the poor parents, I'm sure, with all the kids at home. So there were actually children packages that were developed and online engagement activities happening as well. So one initiative was for a pivot online called Kids Read, where weekly reading sessions were held for kids. Now, these kids were special though, because they came from low-income households, and these programs were run specially for them. The volunteers for the library were actually trained with digital skills so that they were very confident when it came to conducting these sessions online. And more importantly, right, it's to also not deprive these poor kids who now have no access to the books or, you know, stories and reading activities and stuff like that. And most importantly, it's to, you know, like I said, help those poor parents at home as well. So there were also other programs which consisted of things like songs and rhymes, so that parents with toddlers especially, and, you know, couple of months old babies and stuff like that, to keep them entertained, so that whilst the parents are juggling everything from work to home to kids, you know, they still had that little breathing space and they can plonk the kid in front for these for these activities and programs specially curated for them. So that was pretty good.
That indeed sounds pretty good. And before I go to David, because we also on Twitter and different social media, when we announced this talk that we're having right now, there was also a question: how did the staff respond? And what do we think about staff? And because you both are very close to the staff, Was there a huge was there a sort of a gap between the staff that was scared and wanting to stay at home, and the staff who like stepped up and said, we are on the barricades, we're going to fight this crisis and we're going to be out there no matter what, and do the stuff? I know there has been quite an issue with the unions in the UK and everything else. And did you have trouble with that or not, to motivate staff to step up and do different sort of work? Vickery, you first.
Yeah, well, I think it has been really difficult for staff. I think that it's been very stressful. It's, and I think that, some members of the public, once we started to reopen, and even with the curbside service we were offering for a while, there were some members of the public who, didn't want to wear masks and didn't want to physically distance. And, staff had to manage all of that, in addition to the fact that they're dealing with this very difficult situation of, restricted services and trying to meet people's various needs in this very difficult situation. So I think that this has been really, really difficult with staff, and providing training and services to support mental well-being is really important. One of the things that through this whole period of time is with our training platform, we've introduced all sorts of new training programs that staff can use, and it's the platform and the fact that we've had reduced services has given staff the opportunity to participate in more and more of the training. And we've certainly seen this big increase in staff training, use of the training that we've been offering. So I think that's really important, but it's not the end. Like, there's a lot more we still need to do. And I think it's going to take us a while to really get to a place where staff are feeling kind of the way they did pre-pandemic. I think that, and I think this is just really a reflection of what's been going on in the larger community too, is the health and safety protocols, the fact that we've gone through this pandemic is just something, of course, we never anticipated, and yet we're in it. And it's lasted, I think, a lot longer than most of us thought. So I think, this is an issue for our larger society, but it's certainly an issue that we need to deal with as leaders of library organizations as well.
Absolutely. So then, before I get to you, I want to go to David. David, because we talk about staff, it's a nice bridge. Did it change your method of teaching this whole pandemic? Did students come up to you with questions? Did of course, the communication? I know you do stuff online, but the communication must have changed. What was the most remarkable things that came up the last 2 years or 1.5 years for you as a library teacher?
Well, so the life of a library teacher, life of a professor is really 3 parts, which is research, teaching, and service. Figure out your order. For South Carolina, the teaching didn't actually change that much. We were already 100% online, and many LIS programs in North America had already had a strong online program. Ironically, I then came to Texas that didn't. And there was a lot of transitions to how do we teach online, and sort of things that used to take 1 year and 2 years to plan, suddenly we're taking 1 week and 2 weeks to plan. And so that caused a lot of stress. And on the teaching, one of the things that a couple of things needed to change. One, you just asked about staff being sort of in crisis. We had a lot of students that were in crisis at the undergraduate and graduate level, and the professors were the people that were right in front of them. And so they had to sort of provide a lot of real-time counseling. And that created a great amount of stress on the faculty already. And so we had to create not only places and connections for students, but for the staff and for the faculty as well, so that they could sort of have a place to go back and deal with their own issues with children and safety and such. The other thing in teaching that we changed was we just stood up a brand new curriculum the semester before. But it really did change the content of teaching, or I should say, we worked really hard for it to do. And what we learned is, all the things that Vickery is talking about, all the things that Sadie-Jane is talking about, those don't happen in Library 101, pick whatever course you want. When we're talking about community engagement, the idea of I kind of wish that sometimes we would pick up and call vulnerable populations and see how they're doing, but that wasn't sort of a standard service. When you look at Places like the Charleston County Public Library that suddenly did a lot of Tai Chi because that's what their community online. In Chattanooga, Tennessee, their library offered so much video and based video, they started calling it television stations and creating local groups. And what was great about that was the passion of librarians were organizing it. It wasn't, so they could, one of the comments we heard on the third thing, which is as a researcher, one of the things as we talked to library directors, librarians in the field, a couple of things emerged. One was they were being much more directly involved in creation of services and content. From the directors, a little worry about how they would go back to functioning before in dealing with some of the physical activities. And the other thing that really showed up that in our research was that we had always assumed that all this lovely community-based librarianship online and in person was happening in lockstep. And what we found is as soon as the COVID closed the doors, the sort of in-person disappeared. And a lot of libraries quickly reverted back to pretty traditional library services, meaning we bought more ebooks and increased Wi-Fi. It took a couple of months before we saw libraries really begin to invent and develop and come up with some brilliant services. So the long and short answer of that is, in teaching, we had, if we weren't online, you had to move online. But as a field, we were pretty much there in one form or another. We had to update the curriculum. So we were teaching things minute by minute, bringing down blog posts and such that were happening versus the textbook that never really existed anyway. And then in research, it was a great opportunity to go and see how these concepts of community-based librarianship, putting the patron first, et cetera, was playing out in a digital setting.
This is something we really talk for hours. While you're talking there, we already see like all the things passing by, like the difference between the responses in people saying like the library should be closed and show that it's such a serious thing. If we stay open, we will indicate that the pandemic is not as bad as people say and everything else. There's so many sort of lines and streams and in communication. And I think when Vickery said leadership, I think we really need a strong leadership voice and a place to go when we have doubts, when we think, what should we do? I mean, it's not about ourselves and not wanting to be a hero, but it's to serve the community as good as we can, the best we can. Anyway, go to the second question. I want to go to Sadie-Jane first. How, Sadie-Jane, has the pandemic changed your thinking on service in the crisis? Did it change your view on the way the service are being carried out by libraries or not?
Yeah, it actually did. Now I'll share a story of something that made me feel libraries could have done so much more. And I applaud Vickery for what her side has actually done. Now, last year, there was this situation where Malaysia decided to close their borders. This was 16 March 2020, if I remember right. And they announced that, basically the Malaysians who work in Singapore have to decide, do I want to go home to my family? Or am I going to stay in Singapore, not know when I'm going back? And by the way, they are not able to go back as yet, and earn my money. So a lot of them actually do not really have, because they do deliveries, or they work at McDonald's and stuff like that. So a lot of them, if they are going to pay for a hotel room, no matter how cheap, that's already like a day's earnings and stuff like that. So there were so many of them who actually were homeless. They were suddenly homeless. Everyone tried to help however they could. But for me, that made me wonder, was this something that the library could have stepped up and said, you know what, this is a situation, the shelters are all packed, people need a place to sleep. Can we just open up our public libraries or whatever it is and give them a place to, lay their heads versus not knowing what the weather is going to be like? I mean, look, Singapore is just hot, wet, hot, wet, hot, wet. So it's not, but still, to just literally just go to the beach and just plonk themselves there just because they needed a place to stay. And this lasted for days until some companies stepped up and did it. But what could libraries have done to actually help in terms of space? I mean, there's so many public libraries, academic libraries and all that. Yeah, I know there are restrictions in terms of how much you can do to a certain extent, given we're supposed to close and stuff like that. But these are human beings we're talking about. So for me, that made me wonder, is there some way that we could have better responded to this crisis? Because these are human beings, human lives at stake. And when we want them to, help us with, say, room service or waitressing at the restaurants and all that, there they are. So where were we for them? So that was where my thinking went.
Really good. And Vickery, how about you? I mean, you already indicated that you were so quick to adapt and come up with looking at your community with services that were really of great help. But did it like change your way of thinking for the future as well? Do you see like the library changing?
No, I don't think it changed my thinking. I think what it did was reinforce my thinking about important foundational features of public library service. We're accessible, free and local. We're inclusive, welcoming and supportive to everyone. And we have expert and knowledgeable staff who are credible and trusted, and we're flexible. We personalize our services to meet the community needs, no matter what those needs are. And so I think that I really feel that public libraries throughout the world have done wonderful things through this pandemic. And I think it's because of those foundational features that we are well positioned to respond in a time of crisis. Where the thinking has changed, I think, actually, is in the larger community. I mean, we've been talking about the fact for years that libraries are community hubs. And all of a sudden, through this pandemic, we are able to show our communities, yes, we are community hubs. Some have said, boy, aren't you kind of getting out of your swim lane by becoming a food bank? And the answer is no. We're serving our community. This is what our community needs. And we have the staff and the facilities and the resources to do this. In terms of moving food around, we're logistical experts in moving books around. We can do that with food too. So anyway, so it's really helped actually change, I think, the perception of public libraries and the importance of public libraries as a part of the social infrastructure in our cities and our communities. It's helped us at City Hall. It's helped us with people who don't normally use the library all that often. And so I think that more than changing my thinking, I think it's changed other people's thinking about public libraries.
Very, very good. And David, I know we talk more often. I think you're always like on neutrality and activism, the role of the library, everything else. We don't want to go too much into that. But when you hear people like people are always apt to say but I sometimes hear people say but we're supposed to do reading promotion and indeed we're about books and that sort of stuff. That's our core mission, and we're not even doing the best of jobs that we could do there. So if we do all the time doing the great work for the community, shouldn't we first do the first thing good, well, and then the rest? How are you looking at this, David, from your perspective?
People don't read well when they're hungry. People don't find jobs when they feel hopeless. People don't have a sense of self-worth if they don't have a place to go where they're respected. Libraries have always been, to my mind, and I'm talking the couple millennia, have been around learning and making communities smarter and helping them find meaning. And we used to do it with wooden tablets and scrolls, and et cetera, and now we're doing it with gaming programs and food pantries. I mean, I agree with Vickery on that. However, back to your question about changing thinking, once again, I think my goal here, since I'm not running a library, is as I'm looking across different continents and different libraries, I think it's accelerated thinking. What I heard is everything from the very minuscule. Well, we always wanted to do online library card signups, and we never could because we had to see a physical ID. And then the pandemic hit, and 3 weeks later, they were doing electronic signups. We see that in digital collections, but we also then see it in engaging in communities and such. And so I think this shift that we've seen in all types of libraries to community-centered and digital, hybrid would be a better example, but the idea of doing has gone much faster. And I very much agree with Vickery in terms of changing public perception. You have libraries that in sort of US centric information or view, but during civil rights unrest and social justice unrest, libraries were engaged in those conversations and having difficult conversations. We saw during the pandemic, the idea of opening clinics, the idea of opening testing in the facilities. And in our election process, which went seamlessly and is a model to the universe, many libraries were there on providing context, information, polling places, things of that nature. But once again, the idea, this is what the community needed to make it through. This is how the community had to find their meaning and center. This is what libraries have done with all different kinds of tools. And so now they've been increasing. So by and large, just building on both, Sadie-Jane, I think it's accelerated people's understanding of we need to be more than just the place. And Vickery, I think also it's accelerated librarians functioning, but it's also accelerated, and I think you put it really well, the community's understanding. In some ways, being able to step up, and we had libraries that had speaking programs that used to get 50 people as great enrollment, and suddenly we're getting 2,000 people online in one case. And I think that was because libraries were responding and really accelerating their adoption of libraries as community centers and community learners, as opposed to that wonderful quiet reading space in the corner, which hasn't been true for 50 years. So
no, totally right.
Erik, can I add something?
Yes, of course.
Okay, so one thing that was interesting that I forgot to mention earlier was, having come from an academic library, right? My guys actually went through an interesting period as well, because I took over late 2018. Now, I hope I didn't, jinx anything, but then came the pandemic. So they had to adjust to a whole, yeah, I love you for saying that. So I really hope so, but I hope they think the same thing. So what happened was, when I took over, right, they had the same boss for 20 over years. So I came in like a hurricane. So I felt kind of bad for them, because I came and I changed everything because I wanted them to be curators as well as creators, something that David mentioned just now, the importance of creating our own IP and stuff like that. And yeah, so I guess that's why I didn't focus so much on the crisis response, because I was already trying to manage them, managing my whole change in leadership and stuff like that. So I guess it became as a blessing in disguise. I mean, yeah, because we already had things like our own orientation videos done online, and I was already digitizing a lot of things. So this just accelerated it further. So I just wanted to put a positive twist on, the sad story that I shared earlier on.
That's very good. And I'm looking at the time because I should, and I'm always easy to forget time. But this is a nice one leading up to the acceleration process. Do we I was reading the OCLC report that was published recently on a new model of libraries that's maybe coming up. And is that this whole period, is that a transition in your view towards a new model based on the use of spaces, the agility of our way of thinking, the visualization, the online services? Are we looking at let's start with Vickery for this one. Are we looking at a new model of library coming up?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think, David touched on this, on how we've accelerated our digital offerings and features, and we've thought about new ways of staff working and interacting with the public, and contacting vulnerable communities directly. Those kinds of things, I think, have changed the way we think about this. And I think the OCLC report really captures that really well. The only thing I would say is, I think there are enablers for the four categories that OCLC mentions, and partnerships is one of them, and it's kind of a theme in the report. But I also think, data and analytics and technology are also important enablers for any new model. And I think accountability and evaluation are as well. And I just, we've always been about data and technology. We've always been about accountability and evaluation, but I think they're even more important enablers of any new model and how we move forward. So that's what I would add to that, to the OCLC report.
And Sadie-Jane, when I was talking to Jean Tan recently, and for the launch of Lab 25, like this civic citizen science and that sort of thing. And I love the way he phrased it, that he sees the library as a theater of issues, and that sort of puts the questions and the challenges out there for the citizens to look at and maybe come up with solutions. Let's put it like that. Is that like that's happening? Is there already some sort of feedback on that, or can you say anything on that?
Okay, so Lab 25, right? Just to give context, it's basically the public library's journey with partners and the community to reimagine the libraries and archives through innovation and experimentation. They've actually broken it down. Now, this is a summary of what I've heard, because I'm getting the full preview tomorrow.
Okay.
Tomorrow my time. I'm getting confused with all the timings now. So it covers areas like learning marketplace, informed citizenry, Singapore storytellers, as well as equalizers. Now, equalizers may be the part that might be more interesting. And that's because it's a component that helps to elevate Singaporeans, especially as gaps have emerged more during this pandemic. This is something that you want to focus on for those with less resources, less support, and are in danger of staying, how do I put this nicely, on the wrong side of the divide, as they say. That's very PC, right?
Yes.
So they're looking at ways to expand the public library's work in terms of reaching out to kids from the low-income households as well. Key focus areas include things like enabling the public's first encounter with technology, leveraging current platforms, and most importantly, the partnerships that they plan to have. So they're looking at big industry players to collaborate with so that they can help as many people as possible in terms of their experiences and understanding tech, and moving even faster to adopt it. Given the pandemic, right, that's the only way to go. And there's still, unfortunately, that big group of people who, as much as society tries to push them away in a corner, they are the ones who really need the help, because we are the ones who can help change their lives. So yeah, Lab 25, there's a lot of things going on there. I'll get the web link and I'll send it in the chat as well.
Please share, because I think like we were doing a similar thing in the National Library with our atelier, KB Atelier, the National Library, as a sort of place where we work with partners to create, not as fancy as you're doing over there, but it's a start, and I think we need more of those places. But David, getting back to you, I always talk too much. David, how do you see a new model of libraries coming up? Or I remember, and I know you have this symposium, the 18th, I think, where you invited Matt Finch, scenario planner, thinker, putting thoughts out there what the library in 27 years can be like. Do you what do you think?
I think one, and I give Joe Janes credit for saying it, that there's not one future for libraries or one future library, right? The one in Toronto needs to look like the one in Toronto. The one in Singapore needs to look like that community needs to look like. So what is common to me is the librarians, because they're looking at innovation in other neighbors, could be global neighbors, and then adapting them, not simply adopting them, but adapting them to their community and their unique needs. So to me, that's the new core that puts it together versus, well, this is where the Dewey shelves are, and this is where the reference desk is, and how we used to do it. I think the other thing that more so than a new model that's emerging, I think the pandemic really put to the test the noble narrative of librarians and libraries. It was a hard time where all the stuff that we were used to saying, and frankly, that I gave in lovely, rousing speeches, were suddenly like, yeah, but I could die, right? When that came into the equation, it changed a lot of thinking. For example, there was a large discussion about, are we first responders? Should we be open and available as first responders in these kinds of things? And I think a lot of librarians, and once again, there was a sort of disconnect with those who were at the administrative level and those who were at the front lines, not universally, but there was a lot of, unless you're going to come down here with the mask and help us, this is an issue we have to talk about. Julius Jefferson, the ALA president, talked about being first restorers instead of responders. And I like that narrative.
Yeah.
But what does it really put the test to? And so we also saw that many librarians around the globe were re-tasked, that the library was closed. And so they put them doing other functions and other civic tasks. And so I think that it became an issue, which is one, we're accelerating this community connection. We also need to, as part of that, reevaluate what we're doing, because Vickery, I love the idea that it was volunteers that came and staffed those food banks, and librarians were willing to step up. But it's that question of, okay, the community has a different view of us. Have we had the conversation amongst ourselves? And I don't mean it as a profession, but literally as an organization, to say, all right, we're not book palaces anymore. What are we? What's our value? Where we are? And I remember several years ago, actually in Toronto Public, that you guys actually went through a pretty extensive thinking process around the role and competencies around librarians. And I think that that's a healthy thing for all of us to do. So one, we need librarians who are prepared to make library services unique to their community and to be bridges between them. I think we need to be really honest about when libraries need to be open physically in these situations, and how they need to be protected in doing that, and how they need to be protected just generally. They're not just noble servants out there to save the world. They are that, but they're also workers who need to be supported and appreciated at that level.
And before we go to the questions, like I said, we only have an hour. One question I would have, like, we're doing this as an IFLA webinar, overall body, library associations. Do you feel enough support by your own knowledge sharing platforms, library associations, other, where do you get your inspiration from besides directly from your communities? Do you feel there's enough knowledge being shared among whatever, or not?
Can I?
Well,
go?
I do. I think that the library community is great at sharing, and we have lots of forums for that, with associations and various groups that we interact with at with our communities, with IFLA at the international level, but we have lots of other national and local groups that we interact with, as well as community groups and city groups. And so I actually do. And the only thing I would add to that is that I think that we have to, and this is kind of going back to the previous question as well, is, inequities in society have been amplified by the pandemic, and racial inequities, other social economic inequities. And we've always been about bridging those kinds of inequities. And I think that we need to think harder and more creatively about how we address those inequities, because we do have a role in that. And it's an important role. And it's an important role in terms of our democratic values as well, which is also under challenge. So I think all of that is going to feed into how we interact, how we develop our services, how we move forward, but also the kinds of conversations we have amongst our peers and our associations, our universities and colleagues across the world.
I see Sander coming up here. That means probably that I have to stop. Sadie-Jane, you had something to say, and maybe it's one of the questions that Sander, do you have questions from our audience, from our participants?
Yes, I have one directed at Vickery. It's from Arjun. And he asks, given the fact that the proliferation of fake news is a real problem, afflicting people at large, so how did your organization go about combating the infodemic and disabusing patterns of wrong notices they might be harboring, like anti-vax theories?
Well, certainly we, like many libraries, I mean, I don't think we're unique in this way at all, had guides to being able to identify misinformation and, even programs. We have a stream of programs that on algorithmic literacy, so people understand how algorithms are affecting their online experiences. But specifically within the context of the pandemic, we had lots of our staff producing blog posts and reading lists and information of good sites to check and that kind of thing. So we also work very closely with our Toronto Public Health and help promote their messaging and their resources. So misinformation is a huge problem throughout the world, and in part because of the power of social media, I think that, we have a role going forward in terms of promoting science, the value of science. I think science has come under real attacks. and I think that scientific education is really important. We have STEM programming. We need to do more of that. We need to promote more of that because I think that is, and by promoting good information and based on verified resources and good educational opportunities through STEM programming and other kinds of programming, digital literacy programming, I think that we have an important role to continue playing in that regard.
Hey,
I came
thanks.
across, I was at Vickery, I was in Cologne, I was recently, like yesterday. Yesterday I was in Cologne, in Germany, and they had this sign says, Wissenschaft ist keine Meinung. So science is not an opinion. And I can show it here on the screen. You're not going to be able to watch this. Okay? That's really, I really thought it was very clever next to the bookshelves to have like that little thing, sign send up. Great stuff. Anyone else wants to? Some you have more questions? You want more?
Yes.
Whoa. Before we do that,
Yeah.
because I think the idea of providing good information and science and all of that is part of the equation. But to me, the most powerful thing is the trust we build within our community, so that when we say science matters, when we say vaccinations are good, it's coming from a friend versus coming from an authority. I mean, that's one of the things that we're finding is across the board, from media to government to whatever, has been a decline of trust in institutions, except maybe one, two, actually, the military in the US, which is fun, and the other is libraries. And we've seen this in Pew Foundation studies, et cetera. And that doesn't come from being neutral. And when someone comes in and says, I believe that Bill Gates is trying to give me a chip, we say, well, here is a nice little paper that says it doesn't. It's from the idea of going, well, that's interesting. But come on, man, we've been talking about this and, right, that's a different conversation. And all kinds of libraries, academic, school, and public libraries have the enormous power of being local and neighbors and connecting those relationships. And it's through those relationships that then the tools of guides and good materials and webinars, et cetera, become true. Because until we do that, I mean, once again, we'll keep picking on Toronto. They fed them during, right? And that's they broke bread together, et cetera. That's a different kind of relationship. So now when a librarian says, this has been horrible, vaccines would make it better, is a different conversation than a governor. Well, I've been having 2 US governors, which aren't helpful, get up and say, vaccines are great, masks, I don't know, right? It's a different world. And so I just wanted to build on what she said.
Great contribution, David. Thank you. I have an interesting question from Esther from Barcelona. She would like to ask in which way the situation has helped to strengthen the library collaboration with other agents of the community. This is for all of you who wants to jump in.
Well, I'll jump in. We've collaborated with partners we haven't collaborated with before, and those collaborations and partnerships are continuing, and that's really important. And with city partners, in city government, that's another really important partnership. We are being invited to sit at city tables and community tables that we weren't invited to before because they just actually didn't think of us. So it's really been a great in raising the profile of the public library and the role of the public library in the community in that way.
For Singapore side, from what I've gathered, the National Library board, right, the public librarians actually volunteered their services. So when y'all were talking about first responders and stuff like that, this is exactly what they did. A number of them actually volunteered to, be that first pool of people who actually did, the testing, checking whether people are okay and stuff like that at the hawker centers, which is those open air food courts. I'm not sure how many of you have been to Singapore, but they're open air food courts with cheap and excellent food, okay? As well as the wet markets, so that they can, share more about what's happening, as well as help to test and check and make sure that all the safety measures are actually done, the safe distancing measures, 1 meter apart and stuff like that. So they were willing to actually risk their own lives. They partnered with people who, looked after the safe distance ambassadors and stuff like that, and actually did that. So they went out and they reached out to look for the partners that they may not usually work with. And of course, there's Lab 25, but, we can go on about Lab 25 all day long, but I'll keep that for Jean next time.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we saw was that we were suddenly in a different pool than we normally are. I take broadband, right? Many times libraries and public libraries in particular have pushed the fact that we are broadband providers for people who may not have access. And once again, Toronto is going beyond. It's not simply a wire or a Wi-Fi signal. You actually need something to connect to it. But one of the things that happened around broadband, and I think part of why the US, just as part of its infrastructure plan, put a couple $1 billion towards it, was it wasn't just that people who use the library suddenly didn't have that access. It was Fortune 500 companies that when they sent people home and closed the office, all these folks were working in lovely rural areas that had zero broadband. There were school districts that had to, I'm not making this up, come up with packets of materials for their students that they sent around via Ubers because they didn't have enough. They couldn't go online. We had students that when we sent them home, we said, "Oh, you'll study online," and they said, "All right, I just attended half of a lecture and blew my data cap. I can't do the rest of my courses." And so that I think is changed the partnership look, where suddenly issues like on broadband, on digital divide issues that to this point we sort of have felt like we're the underdog over in the corner fighting for the common good. Suddenly we had everything in relation to Twitter and Google who are suffering the same issues and going, oh, that's what you're talking about. And so I think it's an opportunity for us to really build new partnerships at the sort of discipline level and national level scale.
And adding to that, David, I think when you look at the country, you see like you have a 90% coverage maybe of broadband, or there's internet everywhere. You still have those kids studying at home where there's only one laptop, and there's like 4 children waiting for that one. That's why Vickery, like you're handing out devices, maybe should be much higher on our list. Like how do can actually give everyone, because it's difficult to do this all on the phone. It's there may be one device in a house where everybody has to make use of, and not everyone gets the chance to use it. Something to consider, definitely.
And we've also become part of a pretty big conversation about wellness. I mean, the fact that we now know, and there's research and study that says this format is freaking exhausting. I mean, not everyone, I'm sure, is having a brilliant time on this one, but the fact that this was one of the 50 you have to go to in the next 24 hours, and the fact that, you can't just sort of sit back and be unobservable anymore, right? You're right in that face. And the idea of, is this rude? Is this rude, right? I mean, the whole new ethics around that idea. And this is where, once again, I've seen libraries build now wellness programs, all these sort of institutions build staff wellness programs. And I think that it adds to the fact that over the past 30 years, we've seen a retreat of more and more human-centric in-person services and government services, and the library is one of the few left standing that provides that face-to-face connection. These are tools that we need to be able to use, but also we need to be able to help heal communities after this.
Absolutely.
And I think, David, sorry,
because
Go ahead,
Okay.
Sadie-Jane. Yep.
Yeah, sorry, just to quickly jump in. Yeah, absolutely agree. So everyone Zoombified, you may borrow that word now, Zoombified. The one thing is, when I took over, and the first talk that I had was actually on mental health, the numbers were crazy. And the number of anonymous questions that came in, or anonymous, they just needed to vent, that came in were overwhelming to a point. They've actually made a request that they want 3 to 4 more mental health talks on Zoom, and they will attend if it's on Zoom. So it's been absolutely nuts. Now, the thing that I wanted to add on very quickly, Sander, just give me a minute, that I wanted to add on very quickly is in Asia. Now, mental health is already a taboo thing, but one thing that I feel is very important, and I'm hoping that people in Asia are going to listen to me, we need to be the neutral ground. Now, everyone in Toronto and US and everything, it's so great to hear that all of you are all open and stuff like that. But in Asia, it's still a little bit taboo. We still have another group. So there's the low income and all that, but there's another group that still gets a little bit discriminated, is the LGBTQIA+. So what I'm hoping that comes out of all of this is that, and I'm treading on very sensitive waters, I might not be president tomorrow, yeah, is that for libraries in general are not going to take sides. We need to be the neutral ground, the safe ground, and the calming, place for everyone to be able to go to, whether it's online or it's physical space. So I just had to add that. All right, Sander, it's back to you. And it's nice knowing you if I get, thrown off tomorrow. At least I had this.
That's really quick. That doesn't sound, when you're talking about being a safe place for people in LGBTQ, that doesn't sound neutral to me, but okay.
Okay, I have one comment, but it's also a question, and then I would like to wrap up. It's for Vickery. It says Vickery's comment about inequalities being magnified by the pandemic. It also served to show that inequality also exists between library authorities and their ability to respond to the crises. Some were better resourced and placed to pivot and respond quickly and locally. Do you agree with that?
I'm sorry, I kind of missed.
Okay. Basically, it says that it also showed that some library authorities were better enabled to respond and pivot and respond quickly, and others weren't. Do you agree that this is the case, or?
Well, no, I to be honest, I'm not sure about that. I think that we are all in different situations, as David was saying, we do what we need to do in Toronto, you do what you need to do in Singapore, you do what you need to do wherever you are, and it's going to be different based on the communities you're serving and the context that you're operating in. So I'm not sure that that's true.
Okay, thanks. Any last remarks before maybe Erik, you could like to wrap up?
My remark would be like, I could talk to more than 1 hour with the three of you, and I would never stop enjoying it. So thank you very much for doing this together with me and with Sander, and like I said, I can't wait to do this again on the same or any other topic, because it's so important to do these sort of things and to share our experiences with each other.
Great. Well, I fully agree, of course, Erik. I love this and I love doing this. And I would just like to take this opportunity to promote another webinar, which is for the Public Library of the Year Award and IFLA Systematic Award. And we will invite, and you can ask questions to these 5 great libraries from all over the world on Wednesday, the 24th of November at 1 p.m. Central European time, so that's Amsterdam time. So now I would like to wrap up and thank all of you, thank the people attended, and see you hopefully next time.
Thank you so much, guys.
You have no idea. I'm crossing my fingers